I dream for all of us to own wardrobes with garments made from sustainable sources, including fair wages for the makers. I aim to motivate and inspire viewers to see the clothes they wear as an expression of their personality and their beliefs. This is the Slow Wardrobe. Come and have a look. Welcome to a new episode of the Slow Wardrobe. I apologize in advance if there's a crackle in the sound of this opening bit. I've been struggling with my microphone. I don't know why it keeps crackling. I can't seem to get rid of it. So apologies in advance. The rest of the episode is kind of unaffected. It's just this opening bit. I wanted to give you a little bit of information as to what is in this episode and tell you a bit about how I aim to go forward. To start off with, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Linda and I own the Slow Wardrobe, my own little corner of the internet, the yarn and garment world. And I try and make an episode like this about once a month. That may change soon because of the crazy situation that we are in. The spring and summer wool shows that have almost all been cancelled and the rest may go as well. So I have extra time on my hands and will aim to start recording one of these every other week. I've also tried in the past to separate Layercake content from knitting and making content, and I'm thinking, why really? It's a slightly artificial separation, so I think I'm going to jumble them all together and make combined episodes again. Let me know what you think of that. This is a first one, and it has a couple of different sections in it. Before we get stuck in though, there is a little bit that I wanted to say about what's happening all around us at the moment with the lockdown that the UK and a big part of the rest of the world is in. First of all, I live in a very small village called Greyshot, and my studio is about a mile away from my house. I can literally park in front of my studio and I can park in front of my house. So my car is within very easy reach from both addresses. When I'm at my studio, I'm here on my own now. I normally populate the studio together with Andrea, who makes the Layercake dresses for me and who comes to help out at shows. We have a staggered presence here now. Either I'm here or she's here to make sure that our two households stay separate from each other as well. But apart from that, we have a safe environment here in which we can work without being in contact with other people. When it comes to sending out web orders, there aren't a lot of web orders, and I completely understand why. But for those of you who would like to order, you of course are very welcome. I am full to bursting with stock because we were getting ready for Wonder Wool in Wales. There's plenty of yarn stock and patterns, etc. as well. So if you fancy a browse and you fancy placing an order, I will keep shipping once or twice a week, mostly Mondays and Thursdays, until it becomes impossible to do so. And impossible would be to either be stopped from leaving the house altogether, or because the Royal Mail or DPD Local will stop shipping. At the moment, DPD Local reassures me that I can keep shipping my UK parcels as I have been, and for small parcels and international mail, I use the Royal Mail, and my post office is 150 meters down the road from where my studio is. Because we're such a small village, there is nobody out and about, and the people that I have encountered, we've made a silent agreement that we kind of cross the road from each other, so we don't even pass each other on the pavement. The post office has a wonderful system in place as well. I've got a drop and go account with them, and that means that I drop off mail that is fully marked and they know exactly what to do with it. So I don't even see them there. I just drop off my parcels and go. And the parcels find their way to you, my lovely customers. So apart from being able to keep going and film more of these episodes, I wanted to say a little bit about the new terminology that we're all getting used to as well. There's social distancing, which I think is a very good thing, making sure that we don't run into each other and that when we do, we keep a safe distance, safe physical distance from each other. And there's self-isolation, staying at home and not leaving the building in the first place to make double sure that we don't run into each other. I think though there is a danger that the social part of social distancing, together with the isolation part of self-isolation, get put together and lead to social isolation. And although social distancing and self-isolation separately are great, social isolation, of course, is not. There is a lot of information out on social media and in the news in general about fantastic initiatives that are being created and are being taken by people to ensure that nothing is left behind, nobody is left behind. But apart from that, if any of you who watch this feel isolated, socially isolated for whatever reason, I hope you don't feel at all bad about reaching out for a chat or send me an email, send me a message, let me know what you think of this. Feel free to contribute as much or as little as you like, and do not feel ever that you are imposing in any way. No social isolation, please. Moving on to the next point. I have covered the shipping that I'm doing. I've covered the social isolation, of which I want to do whatever I can to avoid that from happening. I move on to whatever else is going on in this episode. First, there's a segment, quite a long segment actually, about how to knit, how to double knit one of the new little kits that I've just introduced, a new pattern that I've done. You may have seen my gingham wingham scarf in the past, which is an unusual shape and has a gingham type pattern. I'll show it to you here. And I've made a variant on that, which is more of a checkerboard pattern. The Dutch word for checkerboard is Dambord, and that's what I've called this pattern. It's a bit of a double entendre to call it Dambord because, of course, Dambord in English sounds like damn board. So, damn bored. If you are, then make one. I could not pass up that stupid little joke, but here you have it. Dambord. It's got an unusual way of knitting it because it's knitted with two colors of yarn, and when one color shows in the front, the other one shows in the back. That's called double knitting. Because this has got such tiny little bits of double knitting though, it makes it easier to work than a more complicated double knitting piece. So how to exactly to do that and how to hold your yarns, etc., how to successfully knit one of these follows in the next segment. If you're not interested in that, I will show you at the start of that segment how far you can jump ahead to the final segment of this episode, which is a Layercake segment where I show different ways of integrating Layercake garments into your wardrobe. There is lots that I could say about that, and I try to incorporate a little bit about this in every episode going forward. So with this combined kind of content, the episodes will take more of a magazine style, take on more of a magazine style again, and I hope you enjoy that. A couple of last words about Layercake. For those of you who tend to use their Layercake garments as special garments, only to wear when you dress up or go out, etc. I know some of you do that. I really encourage you to wear your Layercakes all the time, especially if you're at home. They are such comfortable and versatile garments. They can really withstand a lot of wear and tear. So it would be such a shame. You would do yourself and the Layercake garments such a disjustice, such an injustice not to wear them all the time. Make yourself comfortable, make yourself feel good. That's what the whole idea behind Layercake is. So, Layercake at home, perfect. That's all I have to say for now. Without further ado, here we go, showing you how to knit a Dambord scarf. Enjoy. I'm nearly done actually with this second all linen Dambord scarf, and because it's got these great two contrasting colors, it's ideal to show you exactly how it works to be knitting two different fabrics at the same time. So what you're doing here when you knit a pocket like this, that is one color on one side and another color on the other side, is you are knitting a little piece of fabric that is red in this case, with the purl side to the front, but at the same time you're knitting a little piece of white fabric with the purl side to the back. And you can work on both pieces at the same time by separating your yarns and separating your stitches. So you can see a red stitch, a white stitch, a red stitch, a white stitch, etc. The red stitches get knitted purl-wise with the yarn at the front of the work, and the white stitches for this particular little square get knitted knitwise with the yarn at the back, and you do them both at the same time. Before we get to that though, you cast on with both yarns held together. So you end up with stitches that consist of the two yarns held together. That is the same throughout your work with the first two and last two stitches of the scarf. You can see that all of these are separate. They're all the separate little squares, but then the last two stitches are two combined stitches, and you always hold the two yarns together for those at the beginning and at the end of each row. So once you have cast on and you have a group of combined stitches, you have to separate those. So what I will do now is, just to make that easier to show, is knit into this row with two yarns held together, and just for the sake of this example I will knit these stitches here in groups of two. So I'm taking a red and a white stitch together and knit them as if I'm bringing the fabric into one row of combined stitches again. You only end up doing what I'm doing now once, which you do right at the end of your scarf before you knit the last couple of rows with your yarns combined before casting off. So ignore the fact that I'm going to turn mid-row. I just want to show you how to separate these stitches. So imagine that I've cast on my work, turned my work, and at the start of the row I begin by knitting 2 stitches with my combined yarn, and then comes the point that I have to separate these groups of 2 stitches. It doesn't really matter what color you start with and what color you're going to knit in the front and knit in the back. Just because on this little stitch, that first stitch, I have a white yarn as the first one and a red yarn as the second one, I'll bring the white yarn to the front. Doesn't matter though. I can do it the other way around. You'll see that in a minute. So the next 4 stitches I'm going to separate so that I end up with 4 white purl stitches facing forward and 4 red knit stitches facing backwards. So I'm going to purl just the white thread of the first stitch and take it off. Now I'm going to knit the second part, the red part of that first stitch. So I have 1 purl stitch in white and 1 knit stitch in red. Now with my next stitch, the red one is showing first, the red thread is showing first, and the white thread is showing second. Doesn't matter, I can swap those because I have just knitted a red stitch. So next I'm going to purl a white stitch. See that I still have the white thread in front and the red thread in the back. In terms of my yarn tension, because you're constantly knitting one and purling one with each thread, you can tension both yarns together in the way that you prefer. I tend to loop them around my pinky finger like this, and then I bring my forefinger in between the 2 stitches to make them easy to work. So I'm going to purl that white part of the stitch, tension with my pinky finger, and I'm going to knit the second part of the stitch. I've now done that twice, so I've separated 2 stitches into 4 singles. Same thing again, bring that white bit forward, purl it, and knit your red stitch. We've now done it 3 times, so we're going to do it 1 more time. Bring the white one forward so you can purl it first and knit the second part of the stitch. So in the little example that I'm showing you, I now have 2 double stitches and 8 single stitches. White, red, white, red, white, red, white, red. Now I want to swap, because in my little checkerboard I have only 4 stitches of any one color and then they swap around. So that's exactly what I do. I swap them around. The red yarn comes forward for purling and the white one goes back for knitting. Retension them. Make sure you keep them nice and taut. So I've just knitted the red stitch last, and now I'm going to purl again first and then knit the white and purl the red and knit the white. And that's how I keep going all the way to the end until I have 2 combined stitches left and I knit those 2 together. I knit those as double yarn stitches. I don't knit them together as a 2 into 1, but I keep those as stitches with the yarns held double. So that shows you how to separate your stitches right at the beginning. Now I will take these back out because it was just my little example. See how easy they come away. And with the linen, because it's not bouncy and it's not stretchy, stitches hold themselves quite easily. You can just pull this whole lot out and then put them back on the needle the way they were. So in my example here, you see a knit stitch in red, a purl stitch in white, knit stitch in red, purl stitch in white. I want to keep going with that pattern, so I pick my red knit stitch up first and then my white purl stitch. Same with the next one. Pick up the red knit stitch, then pick up the white purl stitch. Keep going. My last one was a purl stitch, so I pick up a knit stitch first, in this case the white one, then my red purl. I'll take them all out to the end so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. That's me back at the beginning of my row. White knit stitch, red purl stitch. White knit stitch, red purl stitch, white knit, red purl, and then my 2 combined ones. They both show up as purl stitches, of course, because I have knitted them at the end of the previous row. So I'm knitting a row, starting with my 2 combined stitches first. I was splitting the yarn there, so beware of that. Now I'm knitting a red little square here, so it's my red yarn that needs to come forward and my white yarn stays behind to knit the square behind it. My red yarn presents itself first, my red stitch, so I purl first, then I knit. I purl my red, I knit my white, I purl my red, I knit my white. One more time, and then I get to my next square. You can always see what you need to do by looking at how the stitches were knitted before. You always knit them the same way. So this is a knit stitch, that's a purl stitch, knit stitch, and now I've got a white purl stitch. That means that it's the start of my next little square. So I need to swap my yarns. Bring my red yarn to the back and my white yarn to the front. Work my next 8 stitches, 4 and 4. Third white stitch, third red stitch, fourth white stitch, fourth red stitch. Same thing applies. I go from a red knit to a red purl, so it's time to swap my yarns. It doesn't really matter whether you swap over or swap under. I don't really pay attention to that, and in the final finished fabric you don't really see it. What I do make sure I do is not to always swap over or swap under, because then your yarns here start twisting around each other and become more difficult to feed in. So if you have a tendency to swap them the same way every time, then pay attention to that, and after a first couple of times swap that back. Otherwise, like I said, it will become more of a tangle. I'm at the back again of my little square, so I swap my 2 yarns, pearl white, knit red. Now, of course, it's very easy with this very contrasting yarn to see what I'm doing, which is why I've chosen it to demonstrate. If you have 2 colors that are closer together, then you do have to pay more attention to ensuring that you've got good lighting. And in the case of the combination of cumulus and linen yarns, I will show you that in a different project in a minute. You have to make sure that you work with lots of light to be sure that you see the difference in texture, because it comes down to texture of the yarns rather than the color of the yarns if they are very close in color. I'm progressing nicely through my row here. As you see, it's not a very fast knit, but you do get into a lovely flow with it. I'm keep doing this slowly to keep demonstrating to you guys what I'm doing. If I would be doing this in my lap, I would speed up, of course. But because it's not a very large project, even though it's not super fast, it is very satisfying, especially the fabric as it starts growing, because it is completely double-sided but made out of fine yarns. The feel of the fabric is fantastic. It's got great body, but it's supple and floppy at the same time. So here I am at the end of my row with my 2 double stitches remaining. So I bring both my yarns to the back because I'm going to knit these 2 double stitches. Right, so now I have finished these little blocks and it's time to swap colors. I've done a white one, a red one, now I need to do a white one again. How do I go about it? I don't want to see stitches that are half white and half red, so I have to swap my yarns rather than start knitting certain stitches in different colors. And the way you go about that is as follows. You begin, as you do with every row, with your 2 combined stitches to make sure the side of your work is closed. Now, this before was a white purl stitch, but now I want to make a white knit block. So this purl stitch needs to become a knit stitch. And my red knit stitches need to become purl stitches at the front of my work. The way I go about that is to simply put the yarns in the opposite position. If I were to keep knitting this white block, my white yarn would come forward to purl with. In this case, my white yarn stays behind to knit with it. And all I do is take that first stitch and instead of purling it, I knit it. And that second red stitch, instead of knitting it, I purl it, etc. I knit my white stitch and I purl my red stitch. And I do that until I reach the end of my little block of 8 single stitches. Knit my white, and I've got 1 left here. Purl my red, which is now right next to a purled red stitch from the previous row. So I just swap like I did before, because these purled red stitches now need to become knitted red stitches in the back of my work. So I knit the red and purl the white, knit the red, purl the white. If you go in this direction with the stitches in this sequence, when you knit first and you purl second, you may find that you end up knitting slightly faster. It's a little bit like how a knit row is a bit faster than a purl row. Seemingly, when you knit first and then purl, that's what I have found anyway, you go a little bit quicker. So what you're looking at now is that little block of white is followed by that first row of red, and you can see that the stitches are ever so slightly diagonal above each other because of course the yarn is peeping in between the stitches that are below it, so you get that slight diagonal line. However, you can only see that diagonal line of stitches while they're on the needle still. If you look down through your work, then those diagonal lines are virtually impossible to see. The stitches kind of settle below each other like they do in any knit work, and it all ends up looking very regular and very neat. I'll show you one more block because I'm at the end of my second block. I've finished with a new white purl, and the next white purl needs to turn into a knit and go to the back of my work. So I swap my yarns and do just that. I knit my white and I purl my red. So you never swap colors. A white stitch never turns into a red stitch, and vice versa. They always remain the same color throughout your work. Here's my 8th stitch back at the end of that particular block. I'll now show one more time, because it's better in terms of sequencing, what you do when you get to the end of your scarf and you're going to get close to casting off. Here's my cast on at the beginning. So we're going to put some combined stitches, a couple of rows of combined stitches at the end before casting off. Like you normally do, imagine that this is the start of my row. Ignore the stitches on my right needle. If this were the start of my row, then these 2 stitches would be my first 2 edge stitches, and they would be combined, as in knitted with both yarns held together. And all you're going to do now is do exactly that for the entire rest of your row. So every little group of 2 stitches you knit together as one. Make sure that the group of 2 always belongs to the same block so that you don't cross over. I don't think it would be a big problem, but you would see that a little bit and you would end up with an uneven number of stitches at the end. So always combine the stitches that are from the same block. That should go quite naturally. If you end up finding that all of a sudden you're combining one stitch of a previous block with one of a next, then at some point before you've either knitted a single stitch on its own or you have combined 3 stitches by mistake. So check back along your row, think back a little bit until you get to the point that your stitch groups, their little stitch duos, stitch sets line up again. So you just combine all of these right to the end of your row. Then at the end of your row you have your 2 combined stitches, your 2 double stitches again anyway. So at the end of this row you end up with all combined stitches. And then you fairly loosely cast off. It shouldn't be too loose because of course there's no stretch in your linen. So to show you with the scarf that I did before, there's my cast off. Not too tight, not too loose. and then cast off in a straight line. I'm now going to show you the combination of linen yarn with, in the case that I do them, cumulus yarn in the kits that I do, which have a wildly different texture but the same color. The effect is wonderful when it's knitted up. And when you're knitting it, I'll show you, because they're both dark colors and both the same, how different what you're looking at when you're knitting is. Here I am with my linen and cumulus combined Dambord Scarf. You can see that this is a matter of difference in texture rather than difference in color. Same little squares, but you get very fuzzy, super soft squares in the cumulus combined with the crisp squares of the linen. The result is incredibly soft and supple, but with lots of structure because of the linen. I personally knit the linen samples on a 2.75mm needle because I really like the fabric that gives me. And because of the extra volume that there is in the cumulus yarn, you see them here next to each other. One smooth, the linen, one fuzzy, the cumulus. That extra volume, I like it if that gets space to add to the suppleness of the scarf. As a result, it gets a little bit wider, but it doesn't seem to be taking much more in terms of meters. And the kits that I have for these scarves all come with 50 grams of yarn per color, regardless of which type of scarf you're choosing. So you always have lots of yarn available for the scarf, and you can actually make it a lot longer should you want to than what the pattern calls for. You'll have plenty left over. So I've got one smooth and one textured yarn. Like I do with all of them, I start with knitting both first stitches with both yarns held together. First combined stitch, second combined stitch, and now I have to start separating. I can just about see that my first stitch is a knit stitch. I can also see, even if I don't look on top of the needle, where it's less easy to see which stitches are fuzzy and which are smooth, I can see that this is a square with the fuzzy side in the front. So if my first stitch is a knit stitch, then I know that that's my linen yarn. So I can determine that by looking at the stitches, but I can also work it out by looking at my work. When in doubt, look at your work, not purely at the stitches on your needle. So my first stitch is a knit stitch, and I've got the linen at the back. So my linen yarn in my hand stays behind, and my fuzzy cumulus comes to the front. And here I go, just like I did before. I knit one, I purl one, etc. In the beginning, you may find that they all look alike, but you very quickly latch on to the fact that there is a clear difference between the linen stitches and the cumulus stitches. And there I am at the end of my first square. When in doubt, count your number of stitches, or if you would find it easier, or if you knit on this in the evening, for example, you could choose to put a stitch marker after every 8 stitches. So if you are watching TV while you're doing this, for example, or knit with not a lot of light, then just put stitch markers in between every group of 8 stitches, so that you get from your stitch marker, you get your cue as to when to swap your yarns. You can see very clearly sets of 8 stitches here, so I don't really need that cue. Plus I'm knitting in daylight at the moment, so I haven't got those stitch markers. But if I'm going to knit on this tonight, that's very well what I may end up doing. First stitch is a purl stitch, so that's a cumulus. It is a knit stitch, sorry. First stitch is a knit stitch, so that's a cumulus. Second one is a purl stitch, which is my linen for this little square. Everything else remains and the way I showed you with my other project. Oh, the other thing I can show you now is that if you have a sequence of a knit stitch first followed by a purl stitch, you can do a combined working of it. So you knit, go into your linen stitch, purl it, bring the yarn in between your two and let them slide off. Now I've knitted my cumulus and I've purled my linen, but instead of completely separating the two, I've kept them on the needle. So again, I knit, in the same movement I come into the purl of my linen stitch, yarn around, finish the purl of my linen stitch. Don't go through both stitches, just through your purl stitch, and let them slide off. Once more for good measure. Please note that this is completely optional. This is just for fast knitters who find it easier to combine their stitches like that. Oh, look what is happening. I have switched yarns here. All of a sudden I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this purl stitch is looking a bit fuzzy. It's my next block. See that? So I almost, being in the flow of demonstrating those combined stitches, moved onto my next block. So rather than doing that, I swapped my yarns, of course. A stitch marker would have told me to do so. I knit my linen, I go into my purl stitch, purl my cumulus, come back in between both loops on my left hand needle and let them slide off. Knit my linen, purl my cumulus, come back in between, slide, knit, purl, back in between, slide. One more stitch to go. Knit, purl, in between and slide. I reckon that this dark color, which is the dark teal color, is probably the most difficult one. Or maybe, mind you, there's a blue-black combination as well, which would be even darker. So this is one of the most difficult ones to discern exactly which color you're working with. However, like I said, if you improve the lighting, then it's not that hard. And just like you would with the all linen version, you get into a rhythm easily enough. If you have any questions either about the linen or the linen and cumulus sample, shoot me a message and I will answer to the best of my knowledge. In this section, I'm going to show you how to combine something like the layer cake dress with garments that you may have at home, and why some of them do and don't work. As always, it all comes down to proportion, and I'm going to try and demonstrate that. What I'm wearing is a size 1 long dress. I'm wearing the long one on purpose because, with a lot of you, the way the regular length dress hits you, again in terms of proportions, is going to be similar to how the long dress and where the long dress hits me. It's about mid calf on me, and as you can see, that leaves just enough space to wear a pair of baggies underneath. It's a little bit chilly outside, so I've gone for that double layer. Now, before I get stuck into wearing lots of different tops, what I would like to emphasize again with a dress like this and that lovely little balloon shape that you get is that you can wear virtually any type of garment underneath it. I'm wearing the baggies now. You could, of course, replace that with bare legs in summer, or just a pair of leggings, or a pair of trousers, almost any type of trouser that is not quite as wide as the baggies are. The one thing that I would like to pass on to you, though, in terms of how you choose your trousers, is to go for trousers that are longer rather than cropped. If you have a dress that comes down to mid calf and you then add cropped trousers, unless those trousers have a wide leg and are frilly or are just a pop of color, for example, you have to keep in mind that the bottom of those trousers are going to make an extra line across you. So you get the line that runs across the bottom of the dress, then you get a line that runs across the bottom of the trousers, and then you get your shoes. Because the dress is quite long already, that can end up looking quite bitty. So longer trousers and elongated silhouette from the bottom of the dress down ends up working best. And with elongated, I don't mean narrow or tight. Goodness me, look at those baggies. They are super wide, as always. They're almost skirt like. But wide trousers would look well too. With elongated, I mean where the trousers longer rather than cropped, so most of them don't end up disappearing underneath your dress. Having said that, most trousers will work, and you can use the fact that you don't see that much of them to prompt you to wear them in an accent color. So, a color that you may be very keen on, but that doesn't look very good next to your face, or a color that comes back in one of your other accessories or one of the other garments that you wear, is nice to repeat at the bottom, popping out from under your dress. Try to remember that things like petticoat skirts, long underskirts, skirts with lace at the bottom all work extremely well if they just peep out from the bottom of your dress. In terms of skirts, you've got a little bit more space to play with, only a little bit showing underneath the dress, rather than with the trousers. With the trousers, because they create the columns around your legs, that whole proportion game plays slightly differently than with a skirt. You can easily wear a skirt that only pops out 1 or 2 inches from below your dress. So back to what's happening up top. I've started with a super neutral long sleeve t-shirt. This is a long sleeve rib t-shirt that I bought online from the Gap. I've got it in a couple of different colors, and it makes a great base layer for most seasons except for summer. So I wear these a lot, and they're super soft, very comfy, and they're available in a tall length as well. So far, my plug for Gap, that wasn't intentional. Let's move on to the tops to wear and what does and doesn't work and why. I'll start with two different types of striped tops. Everything I'm going to be showing you here are just garments from my own wardrobe. They are different brands and different materials, and I have mostly picked them to show how different proportions work. What I have here are two striped tops. If you just look at them on the hanger, they look quite similar. I'll take these clips away, they don't serve any purpose and they may just confuse things. Okay, so two stripy tops. They are almost identical in length. They have very, very similar stripes. I'll show them more up close so you can see. They are made out of different materials, but that is not the important bit here. The important bit is that how similar they look. I mean, there's a difference in sleeve length, how similar they look on the hanger, and how different they're going to look once they're on my body in combination with the dress. And I will explain why. You can pretty much ignore the fact that this has got 3/4 length sleeves. It stops just over the top of my pockets. The pockets in the dress are slightly higher than the pockets on, for example, the play suit and the smock. We've done that because the silhouette looks better with the pockets slightly higher on those garments. And this looks good. In terms of where those stripes begin and end, the amount of skirt that you can still see would work well as an outfit. Happy with that. Now I'll put the other jumper on. I'll show this from all sides. Okay. So on the hanger they look very similar, but look what happens when I put this on. Ignore the long sleeves, just the silhouette. Look at that. Slightly over the top of my pockets. This looks awful. My fat blobby tummy, everything is showing from a very far distance. Try and hold everything in. It's like, oh, it's a bit of an A-line, lovely. No, it's not lovely at all. It's sticky. It's too tight. It pinches the pockets. It pinches the dress. This doesn't work at all. So even though on the hanger they looked quite similar, on my body they do not. And the difference all of a sudden has become obvious. The difference is the amount of positive ease that there is at the widest part of my body. This jumper has far more positive ease than this one does. If I put this back on a hanger, I can maybe make visible how big the difference is. I've got both of them on a hanger. I'm holding them together, the two side seams at one side, then go across, and then look what I've got at the other end. The difference is 5 inches times 2, so there's a 10-inch difference in width between these two jumpers. There we go. So When on the hanger, they look quite similar. When on the body, it's two completely different stories. One works as a top over the top of my dress. The other one would work brilliantly if I wear it underneath. It's a thin jumper. It's not oversized around the sleeves. So I could wear this very successfully underneath my dress, just not over the top. So there's a first thing to keep in mind. If you have a body shape that is kind of the opposite of mine, so you have a bust that is larger and a hip measurement that is smaller, you may be able to get away with a jumper that has a slightly different proportion. However, the proportion of the dress stays the same. So what you want to avoid at all times is a measurement across at hip height of a jumper that is smaller than the measurement across of your dress. Because even if you put a narrower hip underneath it, the jumper will start bunching the dress across, and that just doesn't look right. So make sure that whatever you wear over the top always has a bigger circumference at the spots where it's most important. And with this dress, because of that shape, it's at hip height than the dress itself. So circumference of the jumper bigger than the dress. However, there are exceptions. And that is, of course, when you're wearing a cardigan. When you're wearing a cardigan, then you can get away with a much smaller circumference. And I'll show you that now. Here we have a sample of a very long drapey cardigan knitted in a beautiful lace stitch. The cardigan is knitted in my soliloquy yarn, merino silk blend, a 3-ply that runs 600 meters per 100 grams. And the pattern that was used for this cardigan is called Firth of Forth. It's by Kate Davies. And it is just lovely. It's a fabulous cardigan to wear with Layercake, but in general, it's just a very special design. One of the things that makes it so special is that with this open stitch, you end up with an unbelievably stretchy fabric. That means that the fabric will move and flow however you push and pull it. If you look closely, turn around, this is either the smallest or the second smallest size of that cardigan. It's so small with my big bum that it only just reaches beyond the halfway around my hips. But if I pull it up, I can pull it around myself quite easily. I wouldn't want to do that because it doesn't look particularly good, but I can do it if I want to. Wear a cardigan like this, have it hanging open, almost like a flag as a cape behind you, and you can get away with wearing this as a top layer over the dress, covering a big part of your body on the back, all the way down your back, down your bum, the tops of your legs. Everything has an extra layer as if you're wearing a blanket, but the original silhouette of the dress is still there and looks good. I could even pull this across. This is a cardigan that doesn't have a closure, so you could wear with a pin or a clip or something like that. I could wear this, pull it across, and just go above and below my bust, or even just below my bust. Pin it together with a nice clip, and then just have it hanging open the rest of the way. It would still work, it would still look nice. And it's because there are enough big expanses of fabric that create a nice silhouette together. Got extra warmth, but you still have the look of the dress. Now, if you want to make this warmer, dress this up warmer, of course you can just add a scarf or a cowl, for example, and that would give you a whole extra layer of warmth around your neck and leave the front as it is. I've got 2 layers here already anyway. But if you're wearing a bigger size cardigan and it would be big enough to close it with some positive ease to not infringe the silhouette of the dress here, then you have to be careful that you don't end up creating a very big square block, because you're making sure that you don't squish this part and have that extra length. So using this as the width and then the length that this cardigan is, you're in danger, if it's a closed cardigan, of turning into what looks too much like a bookcase. So if you want to do that, if you want a cardigan that's closed, then you're better off making it shorter than this. Go back to that length of hip height, so you have a nice amount of fabric and a nice silhouette for the top half, combined with that tulip shape at the bottom. I hope I'm making sense. I'm going to show you another example of a jumper that is not great in combination with a dress, but it would be easily misconstrued for a jumper that does work when you see it on the hanger. This is a jumper that's knitted in my Trinity Twist yarn. It is one of my favorite designs by Isabel Kramer. Yep, and it's called Driftwood. Looks awful. Same problem. Too fitted around me compared to the free-flowing shape of the dress. It's got nice narrow shoulders. It's got an unusual sleeve inset. It just doesn't work at all. However, if I put this underneath the dress, you wouldn't normally think of doing that. This is a Trinity Twist is a sport weight. It's very close to a DK weight. I think a DK weight underneath a dress of this shape. See what it looks like. Here it is. Because the bust is virtually fitted around me and the shoulders are fitted and not oversized, I can put this underneath the dress do with a bit of blocking. It's a little bit floppy here in the back, but you can see that this neckline follows the neckline of the dress quite nicely. And on a day like today, where it's quite chilly, I can then create this silhouette without having to wear anything else on top. Have a nice warm jumper underneath the dress and look stylish with the dress. And in this case, the baggies, or I could bring the light colors of the jumper back in a skirt, for example. Let me show you that actually. I'll keep this jumper on and then show the dress, but with a white or lighter colored underlayer, one of the skirts that we still have a couple of in the sale. And this is the difference. Same dress, a different bottom layer. The spinning skirt in the herringbone linen, the natural colored herringbone linen, with a long skirt like this, you can really see that the bottom of the dress is not completely straight, but it's got that slight tulip shape at the bottom, which I love. I love the fact that you can see that so much better with a dress like a skirt like this. So this brings that natural color that I introduced with the jumper on top, the light colors, and brings it back with the skirt at the bottom. And because that wide skirt is underneath and flowy, it doesn't matter that the circumference of the skirt is bigger than the circumference of the dress. There's lots of movement with both of them. And then of course you can play with other accessories. Cowl, for example. Another Isabel Kramer. As you know, I've got quite a penchant for her designs. Works a treat. Now, you're almost wearing the dress here as you would a smock or a tabard. I hope you can recognize that. Of course, you can add a smock or a tabard to this, depending on how you want to play with your layers, and then leave the skirt out if you're not too keen on the very long skirt length that you get here. You can create a similar kind of play of layers at the bottom by removing the skirt and then adding a smock or a tabard. You're also not stuck here with the jumper. I just showed that jumper because I wanted to give an example of a bigger, heavier jumper worn underneath a dress that is relatively fitted here, and what to look for, i.e. the bust circumference of the jumper needs to be similar to yours. It needs to be fairly fitted, and the sleeve inset should not be too roomy, not too bulky. But apart from that, you can wear a bulkier jumper underneath the dress. So that was the reason for this top. But now, having picked up on that lighter color at the bottom, you can move into more of a spring look by not replacing the dark color of the dress, but by playing with the color of the other garments that you wear it with. One of the questions that one of the requests that I got moving forward with the podcast is like, well, how can I bring some spring color into my wardrobe? Start playing with lighter colors. And if your layer cakes all happen to be dark, you don't have to rush out to buy a lighter layer cake. Look for lighter garments in your wardrobe. I'll show you another example by leaving the skirt there and adding a lighter garment on top instead of the jumper. Moving into spring. Here is a shirt that is made out of very thin cotton. It's not particularly crisp. It's not really white. I very often talk to people on the stand about where this was a nice crisp white shirt that would look lovely. I guess I don't mean it as literally as a crisp and white shirt. This is not crisp and it's not white, but it is a shirt And bringing in a shirt creates a very particular look in combination with a dark layer cake garment like a dress. Of course, in this case, it brings back the color of the skirt and creates more of a spring feel. The contrast of the colors does mean that it gives the dress a bit of an apron-like feel about it. I personally love that. But the main point is that if you have a garment like this and you wear this with a dark shirt or a dark top and a dark skirt, the whole look transforms and looks quite wintry. And by just replacing those two base pieces, those two base layers for a completely different color in a sharp contrast, you step the whole thing up and turn it into more of a spring look or feel. Same goes for the accessories that you combine it with. If I now add a dark scarf or a dark wrap to this look, it dulls things down again and brings it more into autumn or winter. If I go for very light colors, then I play up this sense of, guys, we're moving into spring, we're moving into summer. I'll give you an example. Here is a scarf that I have not knitted myself. It's a woven scarf, a very thin woven scarf. And I've brought it to show you nice light spring-like colors that when added to a look like this, even if you wear it in a fairly wintry way, warm around your neck, keeps that spring look going and that spring feel going. Whereas if I replace this with something much darker, here I have my much loved sample of a big Westnitz shawl called Texture Time. It was his mystery knit from a couple of years ago. I still sell this as a kit. Then you see that by just bringing in more muted and darker colors, it's showing more of an autumn feel already, even if it's just a shawl like this and not the rest of the outfit. If I now would wear that shawl around my shoulders, I emphasize that look even more, because I expand the amount of space within the outfit that is taken up by these darker colors. And these are not even dark colors, but just the whole look and feel of it becomes more muted, becomes warmer looking, literally warmer looking with the warmer colors, and more autumnal. Or coming from a winter look, of course, this can be your first step towards summer by lightening up those base layers and then adding one warmish layer in muted colors. You can come out of winter and towards spring. Next on my list to show you is again a jumper that I've brought from home. It's got that extra circumference. It's wide enough in terms of hip circumference to work with an outfit like this. However, this still has some issues. For a different reason, again, I'll show you. Nice oversized jumper. Nice long sleeves, V-neck. I can make my shirt underneath this work quite well in terms of colors. It's all fine. It's wide enough. It doesn't restrict the movement of the dress. How does it look? It doesn't really look good at all, does it? It looks a bit like a wet rag. I'm following my own rules, right? So why doesn't this work? Okay, couple of things. If I stand back, this length of the jumper, the amount of the light color you get from my shoulder to the bottom of the jumper is almost identical, if not slightly longer, than the amount of dress color you see from here to the bottom of the dress. Can you see that? In terms of sizes of color blocks. And truth be told, this jumper is 4 inches longer than the top of my pocket. So although in terms of width it doesn't constrict the dress, something else goes wrong in terms of proportions. It's partially that division of color blocks, but it's also partially the fact that this jumper is very thin. The stripy one was very thin, but it was shorter. This was very thin, and what happens is it kind of folds in on itself and then sits from the absence of my boobs into an A line to that widest point. It hits me at my widest point and longer than the other boxy jumpers that I showed you. So if this whole thing would be 4 or so inches shorter, it's difficult to show because it's not going to drape right, but imagine it would be a bit more like that. See, now my arms are longer than the bottom of the jumper. This is the original length. Just see what happens. The jumper is the length of my arm. See that? It doesn't work. And then if I do this, trying to make it look like a boxy jumper that is shorter, now it does. In terms of proportions, this is shorter than from the bottom of the jumper to the bottom of the dress. The fact that it collapses on itself now looks kind of cool and droopy and flowy. See, and you still then get that slight dropped line because, of course, that length that goes down my arm then falls down. So then this side drops down a little bit. You get to about the top of the pocket. That looks cool. That looks fine. I'm no thinner, but I don't look like a block like this. So it's the proportions, it's how you play with those color blocks, the combination of the relative sizes of the blocks, the thickness of the fabrics that you play with. If this was a very bulky jumper, the rules would change again, and I would have to go even shorter to make it work in combination with the dress. Completely different story again. And the color combination, the contrast of colors. If this jumper would be much closer in color to the dress, then those rules would be slightly different. So a jumper in the color of the dress or close to it, that would be as long as this, wouldn't be as much of an issue. Because then the emphasis is going to be on the fact that it kind of follows my shape from top to bottom. So there is then enough emphasis again on this being narrower, which kind of disappears in that light color when contrasted with the dark rest of the dress. So what I'm trying to say is that there are different factors at play, and I'm trying to give you examples of all those different factors so that when you go back to your own wardrobe, you can try and recognize those in different combinations that you make. In fact, I would love it if you send me photographs of outfits that you have put together yourself, outfits that you love and think work, outfits that you hate and think don't work, or outfits that you think should work but somehow don't, and you don't understand why, so you can ask my opinion. I would love to see lots of different outfits, combinations of layer cake with your own clothes, ideally. Because one of the things that I keep being asked about as well is to show lots more different sized bodies in my clothes. I'm a one woman band. Andrea only makes dresses for me, other than that, and she helps at the shows, but other than that, she's not really involved in the business. So it's just me, and I can't shrink myself. Well, I'd love to shrink myself in terms of size, but not height. So I depend on you guys to show different body size and different body heights in the different layer cakes. It would be tremendously helpful if I know your height and I know your layer cake size that you wear. Nothing else, just your height together with the layer cake size that you wear would be incredibly useful. And of course, your permission to show the photograph of you and your layer cake, either on social media or just in the podcast. Let me know. I've started a bit of a red carpet group of or collection of saved stories on my Instagram account to show more different bodies in layer cakes. I would love to do more of them, and I would love to evaluate different looks on the podcast if you like, because it would help all of us wear layer cake with a lot more pleasure. That's it for today. And I'll hopefully see you again soon.